Representation of the council. Are we about ready?
I think so. We should get started.
All right, great. We have lots to do today. So welcome everybody. Today we do have lots to do. We have our agenda really split into 3 parts. So first, we're going to just have a reminder of our purpose and process as we transition from finalizing the recommendations related to educator program preparation, approval, and then into the licensing part. So kind of the, hitting the ground here. So quickly, because it's been over a month since our last full council meeting in January, here's a refresher of where we've been. So in December and January, we did a deep dive through the subcommittees and then, or subcommittee, I should say, and then voted to send the draft recommendations out for educator program, prep program approval input, and also public input. And we also asked ODE to do a review of the drafts to ensure they're aligned with the Oregon Early Literacy Framework, which is that guiding document to which the executive order asked us to align. At our work session on February 26th, we then received an overview of the public and EPP feedback, and we had a chance to walk through of the opportunities to more fully align the draft recommendations to that early literacy framework. And as co-chairs, we asked the staff to help us further refine the recommendations according to that EPP and public input and integrate as much as possible that early literacy framework from Oregon and that feedback. So that was all shared in advance of today's meeting, and we hope you had a chance to review it. It was a lot, we know. So we're going to give you time to discuss that in breakouts today and decide if those are final. And then as far as, the reminder of why it's important for us to center that literacy framework and what it is, and also a reminder of the deliverables that are going to be guiding our work. So we're going to pivot today to not just talking about the educator preparation program approval standards, but also the licensing standards. So kind of that next piece of the executive order. So we're not going to get to final recommendations by March 30th, but we've been in touch with the governor's office and we've gotten feedback that we're considered on track with all the work we've been doing. And you'll notice that that implementation work is that part of that critical roadmap to complete by the end of June. And so then really just as a quick reminder, we want to make sure that this implementation planning that has been ongoing through our process and we want to make sure that we are centering our work and what we are supposed to be doing, what our role is, and I guess by association, what our role isn't. So making sure, especially, that we will be talking a little bit later today about that licensing conversation, and we'll be getting to that piece next. So that was a lot to go through, but we just kind of wanted to center everybody about what we're doing, where we've been, where we're going next, because the train is moving fast. So with that, I want to make sure we spend some time hearing from Kristen Rush at TSBC and Ken Greenbaum at ODE, and they're going to describe the process that the staff went through to review all that feedback that we've gotten and integrate that into that revised draft that we sent out last week. So that was a lot of talking really fast, but I hope that was helpful just as a good way to center us starting.
Thank you, Co-Chair Gardner. And again, yes, I will also do some efficient talking here through a lot of information. But thanks everybody for again being here today. What we'll talk about here is we'll really kind of ground us in kind of the documents and process for today and what will lead us through revisions. There's a lot of information that came through public comment and EPP feedback. And we want to just make a tight connection today around how that's going to play out through the tasks we're going to do for this meeting. Since there's a lot of it, there's things to accomplish and consider. And also in a virtual space, just want to make sure everyone's oriented in a way that's helpful and productive. Also, just want to note what you'll notice a bit today, the co-chairs will certainly be facilitating kind of discussion and decision points and the substantive parts of the task today. And then program staff, and we will kind of queue up and describe some of the tasks and process for today. So if you hear our voices a bit more today, it's because there's a lot of moving parts and documents, and just want to help move through the time in a way that's productive and helpful for everyone. So with that, what work has been done since our last meeting? So a few things, as mentioned earlier. One, at the co-chair's request, agency staff have done 3 things here. One, edit, and you'll see that reflecting the track changes document, the draft recommendations to further align with the Oregon Early Literacy Framework. And those, and again, we'll connect all of these to documents in a moment, are in the edited track changes draft as green in the track for the track changes. Second, we completed a deeper dive into qualitative coding for all the EPP and public feedback. That we'll talk about in a moment, of how that played out in kind of different implied actions that will drive our activities today. Those comments, some of those that were fairly straightforward, were added in pink into the track changes document. And then lastly, beginning of the development of draft framework for your consideration regarding implementation, which will not be the focus of today's meeting, but was part of the work since last meeting. The 4 columns that you see in front of you here are essentially the categories of action that came out of the EPP and public comment. Really 4 buckets. 1, no action needed. So you'll see 40 comments in that area where there were sentiment or comments were not necessarily actionable for a specific change. A group of things to add to documents that are either already reflected in the track changes document, or another group that will be part of discussion today, and I'll speak to that in a moment. Another group that needs further discussion for the council before incorporating those changes, and then a large group of items around implementation. And again, one thing you'll see about kind of the quantitative number there that I should raise is that each of those comments are not necessarily weighted the same in terms of volume. So one comment might have 12 or 13 suggestions to be put into the document or not. And so just wanted to appreciate the amount of comment and interest and energy around this topic and these recommendations. And also that kind of frames the level of detail and amount that you'll see today for your consideration. We can go to the next slide. So today we really wanted to create space for finalizing the recommendations and implementation. This kind of image explains kind of where we're going to be oriented today. So we have the recommendations for EdPrep approval standards. There's the implementation planning, which is ongoing, and perhaps some subcommittee work on this is ongoing with agency leaders. And then today we'll be really focused on that kind of subgroup on the left, refining recommendations based on feedback. And we're going to have a chance to review revisions today with feedback incorporated, also review decisions, rules, and flagging outstanding issues needing further discussion. And with that, a kind of a double click on that are these 3 tasks. And so the council will engage in discussion and line item decisions around these kind of three categories of items for consideration. And again, we'll tee these up in detail before we dive into each. First is to review the track changes document around recommendations to align with Oregon's Early Literacy Framework. And that is really around deciding whether to accept current track changes to document 3. And again, we'll make sure you are all oriented to that, or decide if more work is needed to revise those recommendations. After that, we'll dive into task 2. There'll be some breakout room opportunities. And this is to review additional specific feedback that was not yet incorporated into that track changes document. Again, similar decision points there around accepting, declining, revising changes. And then the third task for today will be around reviewing additional broad feedback that requires discussion. And we'll kind of provide some themes and guiding questions there, what emerge around considering this as actionable feedback or not, to incorporate it into the revisions given the council's scope and charge. So I'm going to pause there for a moment to see if there's any clarifying questions around process for today, and then take a closer look at task 1, 2, and 3, and the documents that are really grounding us in the work today.
Looks like Anita has her hand raised.
I'm sorry, Anita. Yes, Dr. Archer. Oh, you're still muted, Dr. Archer.
Thank you for your guidance. It seems to me that before we leap into looking at these suggestions, that we need to go back to our guiding principles to be certain that we're making the decisions not on beliefs, but on evidence, and that they fit in what our original directive was. Because we can get off base, forgetting that our whole goal is that the quality of instruction in the area of reading and writing would be perfect for all students. And it seems to me that we need to be certain that we don't add things that are not consistent with what our original guiding principles were. So is it possible that we could review those, Ken?
Thank you, Dr. Archer. Not necessarily my decision to make, so I might defer to the co-chairs, but I do think one opportunity to do so, in a moment, you'll have time independently to review the track changes document, which includes the guiding principles there. So if that seems conducive to what you're naming, everyone will have a chance to kind of read through the guiding principles as part of that time within that document that you're going to review.
I would like a little bit more discussion just to be certain that we are on the right path. And that's just my concern, that when it says things like standards chosen should reflect essential practices for literacy acquisition supported by research evidence, that every one of the ones that we've written as standards actually reflect that. So I'll wait and raise my hand again when we get to that point. I thought you were going to just leap right into the standards, and I just wanted to say, oh, let's just be on board for that. So I'll mute myself, but I do want that time to be spent.
And we are going to have breakout rooms. So right now, Ken and Kristen are just kind of going over the structure of what we're going to actually discuss in the breakout rooms so we can dig more deeply when we get into them.
Any other clarifying questions around process today? Okay. So Kristen, I think if we can share screen, kind of ground us in the documents we'll be working from today before we go into task number 1. You received 3 documents. Document 1 was the agenda. Document 2, why don't we go to document 2? Yeah, there we go. Is this overview document? Just real quickly, just to orient you here, this process overview essentially explains in a slightly different way the slides I just spoke through, how we took the EPP and public comment. There are some general categories of feedback. From that emerged kind of 3 actions, this including directly into the document, potential language to include, and then in parallel, not from this feedback, but in the same timeline, of recommendations regarding alignment to Oregon's early literacy framework. So that process is essentially what we already spoke to. And this will lead to 3 tasks. We'll start here in a moment. The current draft, which includes not only the recommendations, but the guiding principles as well. You'll see 2 colored fonts there in addition to the regular text in green and in pink. Green being recommendations for further alignment to framework generated by ODE, and also some of the revisions recommended from public and EPP comment that we put directly into the document if they were fairly straightforward or aligned with previous conversation. Task 2, again, we'll come back to this in greater detail, is around some additional work to be done in breakout rooms around potential language. These are not yet included in the draft that you're about to see and dive into. There are some of those recommendations that have language incorporated. We can go down there, Kristen. Some of those recommendations do not yet have language drafted yet. That'll be for the council's determination. We'll come back to that again when we get there. And then task 3, kind of some larger discussion based on some themes that emerged from the feedback. So again, this document, you'll be seeing us work in this workspace and capture the council's decision-making and discussion as we move through each task. You have a PDF version of this. We'll be sharing screen throughout to be able to comment, edit, and capture discussion of potential recommendations. And lastly, document 3 are the revised recommendations. These are hopefully look familiar. These are what the council put forth a few weeks ago. And what's key here, again, is green text and purple or pink text. We can debate that at a later time around what OD has put forth around further alignment and some of the public and EPP comments that have been incorporated directly. And so this will ground us really in the first task here. But those are the documents, document 1, 2, and 3 that we'll refer to, 1 being the agenda, 2 being that overview workspace, and 3 being the current revised recommendations. And with that, I think we're going to transition to the first task, task 1.
It looks like Senator Dembro has his hand raised.
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. And first of all, I want to apologize. I've been kind of out of it for the last 6 weeks or so. But just a question about the input that has come in, the feedback from the field. Do we have stats on how what the level of feedback from the EPPs, from faculty at the EPPs, the variety of EPPs, just to get a sense of what the awareness level is and what the participation level has been?
Yeah, I was just trying to go through our drive to find it. We had that the info session kind of going over all of the feedback, and we did have a breakdown. And so I'll try to find that document for you, Senator Dembro, before we get too far into this.
That would be great. Thanks a lot, Kristen.
Okay. So task 1 is going to be around 10 minutes of opportunity to independently read through document 3, the revised recommendations, and really consider your reactions to the green and pink recommendations. Again, green put forth by ODE around how to perhaps further align to Oregon's early literacy framework, and pink offering some of the more straightforward inclusion of public comment and EPP comment into the recommendations. We're going to ask that each of you during this time kind of determine these 2 questions in your mind. 1, do you want to accept the recommendations as revised, wholesale essentially, or do you want to suggest further edits or clarifications, and be ready to suggest those line edits to the full group? Because after 10 minutes of independent time to read through, we will have time to have whole group discussion. Also, what we'll put into the chat, if we haven't done so already, thank you, Alex, is that you can either take your own notes and be ready to share out, or you can make a comment directly into the Google Doc version that was shared at 119 there from Alex. So again, your choice of what feels right, the right way to provide feedback, take some notes and share in whole group, or provide directly as comments into the document. When we come back, the co-chairs will walk us through document 3 to resolve questions, concerns, revisions, essentially from top to bottom. And then taken as a whole, an opportunity to vote on accepting, rejecting, or saying that more work is needed on this version. And so with that, before we kind of press go here, just to clarify, everyone will have 10 minutes here off camera if that feels right for you to read through document 3. Particularly, you'll see the meat or the substance of the standards and make those determinations A and B on this slide, accepting or offering suggestions for their edits clarification on what's in green or pink. program staff, did I miss anything? And council members, any clarifying questions of what our task is for the next 10 minutes? Okay. So with that, I think we will regroup. The co-chairs will bring us back, I think at 1:31, it looks like. And again, let us know if you have any questions on which documents or access to them. Thank you.
All right. We are at 1:31. Co-Chair Fritz, do you want to tee us up for this one?
Sure. Okay, so our next step in this is to go through the document and look at the specific changes and decide if those are changes we want to accept or if we want to revise or save to discuss later. So I think Kristen's going to walk us through the document. I do want to think about what Anita said, make sure we're centering things within those our guiding principles that we decided on earlier. So that section, hopefully you had a chance to review that again. So as we're talking through these, we can reference those guiding principles as our reasons for either inclusion or revision or setting it aside for now. So with that, I think you can go ahead and scroll to that first place. Okay, so we had 3 items underneath our section on dispositions. So I would like to open this up for any discussion around those 3 items and what you might be thinking about those. Are we feeling like those 3 items are something that we can accept wholesale, that those F, G, and H are appropriate to keep in the dispositions? Rep. Boomer.
Yes, as I look at those, I think those are values that we need. But are we going to assess those? Is this something that we're going to assume that our teaching programs and our teachers know when they come out? It's nice to have those things there, but to be able to say that and to assess that our teachers actually have those things, I think may be beyond us, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm always into assessment and identifying and showing through experience people can do things. I'm not sure how we're going to identify that people value this and or believe this. Just a thought.
Yeah, and Susan, maybe you can speak to this too, but I know in our programs, we do have assessments for dispositions that are, it might be checklists or reporting from mentor teachers, that sort of thing that I think we could explicitly put in those disposition surveys. So that might be one way. Again, that would be, that mentor teachers, what they think, but not necessarily we can't really put it in a quantifiable way. Susan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly what you just said.
Yeah. Julie.
Yeah, I was just going to agree that we basically measure dispositions through field work and evaluations from mentor teachers and supervisors. So that's like the only assessment really that we have for those.
So are those 3, Senator Denbrough.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with these three, but just following up on Rep Wright's comment, presumably, I mean, we're talking about how we assess the students. Presumably, these are all values that their faculty are going to be communicating, right? And so somehow, it should be included in the evaluation of faculty as well, right? I mean, should we be looking at all of this through that lens? That it's going to be there in content, but it also kind of needs to be there in terms of the disposition of the faculty who are teaching these materials.
And I think that's a really important point, and I have a feeling we'll hear more great points like that today that we'll want to maybe put in a parking lot when we start talking about implementation. Because, what we're doing to assess faculty is a bit beyond the scope of this council, but certainly should be part of what we're thinking about too as we implement.
Right. I say that as a former faculty member, of course.
Any other thoughts or comments on those three items?
My question is just kind of that conversation, just going through a lot of the additions that I saw here were really valuable. And when the ones in green came from ODE staff, is that correct?
Yes.
So was the conversation just going through it using the framework to identify what was missing from the initial list, or kind of just a little like, is that what had happened? Because I saw that, I know we had talked about knowing that other dispositions were in other areas. And so we were just focusing on the literacy, but to bring in, I mean, we definitely want F, G, and H to be highlighted as well. So was it just that we were worried they would have gotten missed if they were part of other standards?
Yeah, I don't know, Ken, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So broadly to like the process, perhaps we can share another document. I know there's a lot floating around. We did a summary of kind of how we approached this task that kind of lays out our framework for thinking about, okay, how did we arrive at these? So maybe we can put that in the chat as well, Jennifer, if that'd be helpful.
That would be
generally,
great.
Yeah, we thought about essentially for the recommendations within each section, would they be like, are they not yet aligned, mostly aligned, or strongly aligned with the content of Oregon's early literacy framework? There were no sections or recommendations that were not yet aligned, and there were some areas that were mostly aligned. And so what you see here in green, kind of like in our view, moves towards strongly aligned. So that's one more to that in the document that we'll share. In terms of these specific dispositions and some other pieces you'll see throughout, while there were other artifacts that spoke to, I think in the preamble here, kind of culturally responsive instruction, and that they were more general and broad, and that it would strengthen the standards, both in dispositions and the standards throughout, to have some more literacy specific ones. And so that's where these three came from, just a few areas to enhance the other bodies of work that are already referenced in I believe it's the purpose paragraph above. Does that answer your question, Jennifer?
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Katie.
Yeah, I know we're going through them kind of each section by section, but just the larger wondering that I have is there's a lot of additions, and we already had a high number of standards, especially compared to other states. And as someone who will be implementing these in my courses, I am so supportive of so much of the work, but I also want to make sure that we're realistic and that we don't end up creating something that, especially in our 10-month MAT programs, are not possible. And so I just kind of want to say, is there going to be a space where we will check in about that? Because as I went through, it seemed that there were a lot of additions instead of maybe revisions, and just making sure that we are having things that are setting everyone up for success to actually engage in this work. and that we don't put something out there that's so cumbersome, and so I just worry a little bit about going through each one, because of course I'm like, yes, this is great, but that we're really keeping the big picture in mind.
Thank you for that reminder, Katie, because that really is important. And one thing that we wanted to make sure we were keeping this at a level that was attainable. So we do want to be careful about that part for sure, which is why a little later on, there's some other standards that were added in that I want to bring up that feel to me like they might be more in the dispositions. So we can talk about that in a few minutes, but we do need to keep in mind that we have to keep this contained. We could add forever and ever. Julie.
Actually, Dr. Archer had her hand up first, and I just want to be mindful of time because we set aside a half hour for this, and we're just on the first 3. So
Go ahead, Anita. You're on mute.
So my concern sort of goes with Katie's, and going back to the general principles of what we're to do, we have to be certain that when we look at the number 3 of our guiding principles, standards chosen should reflect essential practices for literacy acquisition supported by research evidence. Now, we can get down the wrong path of essential if we look at why the children of Oregon are not reading. It is because they have not been taught the critical foundation skills to high levels of mastery. They have not been taught to have orthographic mapping and thus fluency. And so if we add things, that may reduce the actual energy that goes into the essential ones that would lead to the outcome of children of all races, of all colors, of all ethnic groups being able to read. And so I just wonder, I don't want it washed down so that we forget what is essential. And as we wrote down at the beginning that we were going to reflect on essential practices. All right, so I just am going to keep our mind right there and not make it so difficult for people like Katie to carry it out at her university.
Thanks, Anita. Okay, Julie, you're up.
I agree with Anita, but I think regarding this kind of front piece, this dispositional piece, I am in agreement with adding F, G, and H, because I think that it just broadens who we're talking about, and it's good to be reminded of what diverse children bring. I mean, and that's what these 3 dispositions do. So I think it's fine to add them here and to continue to be mindful of what is specifically needed within the standards as we go forward. So I'm sort of a yes and.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Rep Boomer.
Just a quick thought on legacy, if nothing else. In the standards that we have, their requirements. On this, it's should, and I have a problem with should, because should gives you an option to do or not do. And so that's just a thought. The other one has to do with research evidence. There's lots of research evidence out there. Do we want it to be effective research evidence that directly is for literacy? Do we need to say that or not? Because like I said, there's lots of evidence, reading evidence out there, and I'm wondering, do we have to be specific? Thank you.
That's a good question. And I think one way I might think about that is that we're letting the literacy framework guide us, which was also guided by that research evidence. So that is really spelled out in the framework. But I also think that, and this goes to that next green part under literacy acquisition, that maybe we need to clarify what we mean by that so that we make sure we're heading in the right direction. Val.
First, I want to say thank you, Julie, for bringing that up. And one of the things, and I'm not into putting blame or anything like that, but I do want folks to understand and realize is that while we're talking about evidence-based or research-based or something like that, there has been, science that proves this stuff for thousands of years, but that was not put through Western society's rigor of evidence. So I do want to point that out, as well as I would like to remind folks that while there has been a lot of materials and thought, that it didn't include folks like myself, like others. So I'm glad that we are being asked to come to the table and have some input on what we'd like our children to learn.
Thank you. So I'm feeling like for these 3 items that folks are generally in agreement that we keep those in. Pooja, should we do a vote on that section or should we wait and do a bigger piece?
I think the team, I'm looking at Ken and Kristen, the intention was to vote on every subsection. So with the 3,
Okay.
right? Is that correct?
Okay.
So we
So-
can launch that poll.
Okay,
And
so-
list of 5.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll do a fist of 5 poll, 5 being that you are 100% on board, 0 being that you are not, and anywhere in between.
And we can make sure we spend time on anybody who's fist 1 or 2. Kind of, this is not gonna fly with me and we need some conversation. 3, 4, 5 is that, you may not be 100% exactly 3 and 4, but that we can live with it and work out some conversation later.
So we've launched the poll there.
Just one moment on that. Sorry, I'm having a technical
We've got
issue.
the poll launched, Alex. So does that show up for everybody else? Okay.
That's fair.
Okay, is there anybody, council members, we're not having staff vote except for the agency leaders who are members of the council. Anybody else need to vote? Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. Screen share. So this is the first one on, is it standard 1 team?
Yeah.
Okay.
This was just the dispositions.
Yes, under dispositions, not standard 1. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to be like OAR number 3, dispositions.
So looks like we are then ready to move on to standard 1. Sorry, I have my window open and there's just so much noise. I apologize if you can't hear me. So standard 1, you can see the changes here under literacy acquisition. Item A, item 4 had a pink addition. Item 8 and 7, I should say also. Under part B, there are several additions under instruction. And that's it for standard 1. So any major concerns that need to be addressed in the moment? Julie?
I guess on one, I'm a little confused, the convergence of research and science. Isn't science research? How do we differentiate those then?
Yeah, that was my same question too.
Yeah.
I can speak to that. Of course, council's purview to rewordsmith that. The main thrust of this revision is twofold. One is to not reference Oregon's literacy framework, just based on some legal counsel in a different body of work, to reference a non-legally binding document through what will be OER gets a little unstable. So that's like the main thrust of that revision. Whether or not it uses the words research and science or not is up to the council. We're kind of mirroring some of the language used in the executive order, which refers to, I believe, research and the science of reading and writing. But nonetheless, the most important point we're trying to revise there is it would not be advisable to refer specifically to the framework.
Thanks for that clarification, Ken.
Yeah, I think that needs some wordsmithing.
Do you have any suggestions? No.
No.
You highlighted. All right.
Yeah.
Any other major concerns about standard 1 and any of the revisions there? Rhonda?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think you might be able to handle that first one by just removing and science, the convergence of research on literacy. I don't know if that makes sense to everyone.
That would work.
And then my only other concern about this section, first I want to say I did like the addition of number 8 under standard 1, just because I know that some of our feedback that came back were folks not wanting the multilingual learner section and the students with disabilities section to be completely on its own without reference to that within the main standards. So I thought that was a good addition. Under instruction, I have some concerns about 4, 5, and 6. Feeling like those fall more on that disposition side, and kind of that idea that, again, measurement of that for one thing, but also we don't want to take away from the need for it to be explicit, systematic, cumulative, and teacher directed. We know that that instruction needs to happen that way. But we also, those disposition pieces, 4, 5, and 6, they kind of overlap with the dispositions we already have, and where they don't, could we add those into dispositions and remove them from this section so that we're not muddying the water in this particular section?
Dr. Archer. You need to unmute.
I agree with Rhonda that when we look at current practice in reading, and our document really denotes what to teach, but has only like 3 sentences about how to teach it. And I'm concerned about adding dispositions here that reduces the power of that, because there's a lot about explicit instruction and systematic instruction and cumulative instruction and teacher directed. We could have had much more written about each of them. So I think these are the kind of belief statements that would be best under dispositions.
Could they also be under that practice guide? You know, when we kind of give examples of what did you call them? That like you give
Implementation guide.
Yeah.
One that might to go along with this, yes.
Yeah. So
Julie.
instead of here, those ideas reflected in the practical piece.
Right. Thanks, Julie.
Julie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, under section B, number 4, I feel like that is really something that is more like on a district when they're adopting a core curriculum. That's not something that a lot of teachers have the responsibility of doing unless they're sitting on the curriculum adoption committee. I mean, supplemental materials, teachers often pick out and, pull those resources on their own. But the high quality literacy curriculum, I feel like that's the responsibility of the district. And oftentimes the district picks that curriculum and gives it to teachers.
I will say it's not 100% universally true. I was just meeting with the superintendent the other day that for the first time ever, they have a joint curriculum for their district. So, Katie.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Julie, because it's also really difficult for universities to get curriculum to use with students or to have students look at. And it's something that I am constantly struggling with. And so just even the feasibility of that, I think is really difficult. Not that I don't want to not do things because they're hard, but just being able to have those materials because they're thousands and thousands of dollars to purchase. And I don't even know if we would have access for our teacher ed programs.
But I think in response, if that was part of that, like the implementation document that we're wanting to create, it would be giving teacher candidates perspective, ideas of how you select culturally responsive curriculum and supplemental materials. So I think this could be, again, in an implementation, revised a little in an implementation document.
So let me ask this question, folks, because I'm not hearing, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm not hearing anybody's opposed to these points, but perhaps just their placement here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Either removal or relocating, but not here under instruction. That was my vision.
Okay, so maybe can we put these few in the parking lot for now? Is there anything else under standard 1? Jennifer?
Yeah, I can see why they were put in, and I'm just a little worried when we think about like our shifts in practices. It feels like having those in here make sure that there's still that meaning making in instruction, right? That it isn't just teacher directed, and then there's still the meaning making piece that the child does. So I'm just kind of like, I can see why it was put in, and I'm just worried about certain messages that we're giving that it's only teacher directed, that it removes the agency of the child. And so I can see why those were put in. But I guess I'm the same thing, parking lot, but I'm struggling with it a little bit because I can see the intent, and maybe if somebody I'll look through the document on ODE on why it was put in, but I don't know. I'm rambling now, but I can see why. I'm worried about our message.
Melissa?
Yes, I just want to reflect that I understand what folks are saying and agree with it. And to Jennifer's point, I also get a little uncomfortable with removing it. I think that when you're an English teacher within the classroom, you yourself are selecting materials for literacy instruction that is independent of your core curriculum and is supplemental. It is part of the opportunity that you have with how you build your reading library, for example. What does that look like? And I understand where this fits with dispositions, but it is a part of instructional planning and implementation and the meaning making that happens between the learner and the material. And I'm concerned about losing that.
Charlene?
Ditto Melissa's comments. And like when I look at number 5, that explicitly speaks to instructional moves, right? Like incorporating lived experience into the design of instruction. That's more than a disposition. That is a specific way you can set up and design a lesson. So yeah, I mean, I agree. We can have this, we can continue to have this discussion because I think it yes, there's disposition here, but there's also some practices kind of woven into the statements as well.
Julie.
I'm wondering if we couldn't take some of those ideas, the big ideas from 5, and add them to 3, which is already about analyzing instructional materials. So can we maybe restate number 3 and with that inclusion rather than adding another standard?
I don't know how folks feel about it. So I was hearing some folks expressing that they didn't want these items here because it watered down in their perception the important points under instruction already. Sounds like people are open to them being in this document, but just not at this place.
Yeah. Well, I think I would like to see, I agree, maybe within the standards that are here. I mean, couldn't we weave some of those ideas in there? Analyze instructional materials, designed for both core and supplemental materials, in terms of standards and general principles of effective literacy instruction, and considering like
I'm wondering if it makes sense for us, because we're at 2 o'clock, to say, we know we want this somewhere. We need to do a little bit more work to figure out where it belongs and that we can move on for now. Is that okay, Julie? Okay.
But I don't know how people feel about, can we take some of these ideas and infuse them in what we have, or I'm just not getting a sense of where we want to go.
Nita.
So again, I think that there are dispositions, but when we have one that's about analyzing materials, I just worked with principals in Oregon last week going through the research on things like space. I mean, if we want learning to occur, the importance of space practice, the importance of all the type of explicit instruction used, the type of practice provided. There's really heavy issues in terms of learning, getting it into permanent memory. And so I don't want to wash out, and probably we should have put in more of that, space practice, retrieval practice, all of the things that lead to learning. Because I'm just want to be certain that it doesn't matter who you are in Oregon, you are going to learn. And unfortunately, I have to take a break here for something that would not be your favorite activity, a colonoscopy that is at 2:15. So I hope that I will give all my voting power to my good colleagues here. Just be certain that we don't leave out the power of what we know that makes a difference, that has not been incorporated in our curriculum and our teaching. Really important items like the quality of instruction, the quality of practice, the opportunities to respond. Those things make a difference for all learners. And I just want to say this once again, that if we are concerned about equity, we must be concerned about the power of every child being taught to read. That is ultimately their opportunity to be a part of our society. So I'm off to find out if I'm well or not. I hope I am. And
Hope so too.
Yes, I was glad I could be here for at least an hour.
Thank you. Julie,
Thank you.
did you have anything else? You had your hand up.
I just wanted to add, Anita, that I agree with that, but also to understand that the way to deliver instruction and to impact memory positively for diverse students is that we need to consider their context too. So I do think that we need some language around that. Yes, it is good systematic explicit instruction, but it's not going to be the same for all students given the diversity of kids' backgrounds. So some language on that we should incorporate somehow.
And so we are going to make sure this stuff is incorporated somewhere. It's just, I think for now, we're gonna move these 3 items to the side. We are not gonna be doing our fist to 5 on those 3 items. So unless there's anything else under standard 1, are we ready for a fist to 5 on everything except those 3 items? Yeah, I see general nodding.
And it was the removal of the
Of items under B, 4, 5, 6.
sorry of A, I, and science, the removal of and science as well.
And yes, and also the removal of and science, yes. So your poll should have just popped up. And we're not looking for perfection right now. We are looking for can we move forward and work out details later?
Are there any council members that still have to vote? No? Okay, we'll end the poll. Share results. And we have 3s and 4s here.
All right, great. Okay, I'm gonna pass it back to you, Rhonda.
Hey. So if we scroll down, I think our next section is on oral language and phonological awareness. So the literacy foundational skills. Those are the 2 areas that we had some green changes. Any commentary, questions about those sections?
I guess I have similar questions to the instructional ones. Are they dispositions? Do we include them in an implementation section? I don't see, 'cause
I tend to think of dispositions as kind of attitudinal in nature.
yeah.
That they're a little harder to measure per se. Whereas these, again, it may be that we're looking at, we're good with these, but we just need to figure out where they belong.
I just want to also give a reminder, because there's a lot of documents, and just apologies that there's a lot for us to take in today, but just a regrounding in that the changes that are in green were changes recommended by the Oregon Department of Education in alignment with the Oregon Early Literacy Framework, which is a directive to this council from the governor about what the standards need to align to. So these changes in green, we don't see them as all dispositions. It's not that anything related to equity, of course, is a disposition. We need to make sure that we are creating the conditions where we have educators who see every child in their full humanity and all of those beautiful things that have been stated earlier that I know that we all agree with. So it's really important for the directive of the council to make sure that you're aligning your recommendations and that these were created in order to strengthen the draft recommendations alignment with the literacy framework.
And now all about, the importance of home language and oral language development. But like the primary role oral language plays in laying the groundwork, that's more of dispositional to me. How would you measure that?
Ken, would you mind sharing just because what I read this is that for each of these standards, candidates will demonstrate knowledge, understanding, and application of that knowledge. So I'm just wondering if you can share from your perspective as the familiarity on the framework.
Yeah, that's a kind of exactly what I was going to name. So one way we kind of made the determination of like, where should these ideas, concepts, practices live within these standards is really taking that kind of introduction sentence that Pooja just named pretty literally, right? So candidates will demonstrate knowledge of how primary role of oral language, for example, plays the groundwork for ability to read and write, and that could ultimately be actionable, right? That influences how a teacher works with, considers, designs instruction. Knowledge and understanding of the role it plays in self, culture, tradition, including the importance of indigenous languages. right, that leads, that a knowledge or understanding of that fact of oral language leads to differences in teacher action through a myriad of different practices. But that's why we grouped things under those headings as opposed to putting everything, so to speak, under a disposition. So again, we really just design these off of how the standards are written based on demonstrating knowledge, understanding, and application of. So perhaps that gives some indication, Dr. Sparza-Brown, of why those appear there as opposed to dispositions, which the two or three that we did recommend under dispositions were broader than these, however, were specific to literacy at large.
Maybe the ideas can be rewritten somehow because, for example, with the importance of honoring different dialects, I mean, that's not actionable really. It's like, what do you do about that? You know, how is that going to impact instruction? But it's what is actionable there? It's not just saying, oh yeah, that's important, right? But how do you use it in instruction? So maybe this is another parking lot discussion. And I mean, I'm the only one talking. Other ideas, thoughts?
My only other thought about that is I feel like 4 and 5 under that inform number 2. So how we establish those classroom settings should be informed by 4 and 5. So I don't know how we could maybe write that in to number 2, because that's what that's all about in terms of establishing that environment.
And maybe this is a space, Julie, too, where we need to do more in the guide for teacher educators, because when I read through these, I see things as a teacher educator that I say, oh yes, like we do reading around this and like representation in text and talking about that. But I think we probably need to flesh it out a little bit more in those other documents to support folks. Because I do think it goes beyond the dispositions. We just maybe haven't articulated it as well here to kind of understand what that action step is.
Mm-hmm. I think these are hugely important concepts, but not the way that they're laid out. Or I think they need some rewriting and some reworking to be more actionable steps.
Melissa, you had your hand up.
I would just add, I do think and perhaps they do need some recrafting, but I do think they're accessible and crucial to the point, if just going back to 6, if educators are not understanding that linguistic development, regardless of the language, is equally valuable, and that each language that a child brings is equally valuable to the classroom, yes, that's a disposition in how they look at the value of certain cultures. It is also, however, going to negatively impact their instruction dramatically. And there are certainly ways that you're able to assess whether or not an educator understands that a development in Spanish or development in Bantu or a native language, something that is not a written language, perhaps, is valuable at the same level as the development of whatever the target language is that is being taught in the classroom.
Well, maybe we need to be talking about things like cross-linguistic transfer, and I don't remember where we did. I write so much on different documents, but I mean, what we're talking about is, taking the languages that the students know and us having, as educators, having some knowledge of how then that applies to English instruction and back and forth, and how English instruction can build on, their first language. So maybe under oral language, we just need some direction about cross-linguistic transfer and the importance of knowing how that works.
Jennifer?
I think sometimes just for that what it looks like in a school, especially number 6, we have a student right now who speaks a different dialect that hasn't had exposure to like 10 of the consonants that we use. And so when we kind of learned about that through a parent interview, we were able to go, okay, now we're going to give you some explicit understanding. Seems like you're leaving off these word endings and like really honoring his first language, and then just being really intentional about how we're teaching the acquisition of those other sounds that he hasn't heard yet or heard for a long time.
Yes, perfect. Absolutely. Great example.
Senator
Dembra.
Yeah, I guess my question is, well, we can't just expect teachers to do this. They have to be taught it, right, in their EPPs. So they would need to be exposed to the kind of example that Jennifer just gave, and it needs to be part of the curriculum, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here, it seems.
Yeah.
So there is that going to be that expectation that this content will be embedded in the EPP instruction, and then the teacher candidates will then be expected to know them.
Correct. Yeah. So again, I'm not hearing that people are against anything that's here. It's just perhaps how it's worded, where it's put.
Co-chairs, if I might just offer we're just wondering if given how this conversation is going, which is a lot of like good concepts, need some more refinement in how it's worded and integrated into the holistic nature of the standards, that there's more work to do there. We have another hour that we were planning to do in different chunks of work and in breakouts on the revised recommendation. So we have the time, but I'm wondering if it's actually of the council's decision to make a subcommittee that would work to, further refine these and bring it back for a vote that is holistic, yes or no vote, and no more of the kind of back and forth. So I'm just kind of wondering if the council is ready to go in that. I see some nodding heads, but co-chairs, I want to defer to you.
I was going to recommend something similar. So I think that makes sense to me, but what do others think?
I agree. I think that might be a more logical next step.
Anybody opposed to that idea?
I'm not opposed. I just wondered, based on how this discussion has gone, though, if there's some calibration needed around how we integrate culturally responsive practices. Because if it's continuously kind of perceived as something that's not accessible or a disposition, like how do we need to collectively calibrate around what we need around culturally responsive practices? We've all said it's very important, yet when it comes to the integration and application of it, that's where we are kind of, hitting a sticking point. And I don't have an answer for what that would look like.
I'm wondering if this, thank you, Dr. Williams. I'm wondering if there is a group of council members who are not state agency employees, and then there are state agency leaders, particularly because the Oregon Early Literacy Framework alignment is so critical to this and the executive order, that it's really important for that piece to be also of the council members who are not employees. So I'm just wondering if there's a subset that wants to volunteer, so we could leave this part of the conversation with a shared understanding of who will be on that subcommittee. Co-chairs.
Any volunteers for that task?
Val?
No.
I'm raising my hand.
Thank you.
What would be the deadline, the timeline?
Dr. Williams, did you have a question or were you also volunteering? Oh, you're muted.
I'm volunteering.
Oh, thank you. Timeline.
I would say if we want to have, if you're okay with the process, that the subcommittee would make kind of the recommendations to bring back to the council, and the council would vote at that meeting. If we can do that at the next month's meeting, because we have a meeting next week, my guess is that's not enough time to do the revisions and land on them. So I would say next month. And Alex, if you can help me figure out the date for the April council meeting, that would be the date where we would have this group make determinations. That's really like your final, this is the council's recommendations on this stage of work. And again, it's not final because it still has to go through the TSPC process, but we're not going to spend more time on these recommendations other than the implementation after the April meeting. So if you're okay with that, that would be kind of the timeline. Alex, do you have that date?
Yes, just put it in the chat. It's April 15th.
Thank you.
Julie,
April
were you
15th.
volunteering or did you have your hand raised?
I'll volunteer.
Thank you. Anyone else? It seems like a solid group to me. Ken?
Yeah, more of a process question. Certainly, of course, going to support the subcommittee in any way possible. That was not why I raised my hand. Are we proposing this question, Pooja, did you have in mind both these revisions and those that need some work and discussion that was going to be part of the next task? I just want to clarify before we vote so we don't have to vote twice.
Yeah, my wondering is that if these were the straightforward changes and they get more challenging to consider. So I guess my wondering is it the council's desire for the subcommittee to kind of take on all different aspects? Or what is your desire? Or you could make a decision to say, we're not going to make any other changes beyond what's aligned with the literacy framework. That's the prerogative of the council, but those are the questions that we would need to wrestle with.
Heidi?
Yeah, I think the discussions are really rich, but if the action needs to be wordsmithing something, that's really hard to do in a large group. So I would prefer the model where that's done by a smaller group of people. I think the council as the whole can make decisions around, yes, we approve the content and we want it included and then pass it off to a subcommittee. I feel comfortable with that model.
I'm also wondering, and I might be out, in complete left field here, but I'm interested in these green font changes that we have. And if people generally feel okay with them being integrated, perhaps in different places, could we do a fist of 5 just out of curiosity on the document, knowing that, 3, that there needs to be some changes, 4, there needs to be some changes. I'm just curious. I don't know how people feel. It would just be interesting to me to find out what the general temperature is.
We can absolutely launch another poll right now. And just to be clear, is the question fist of 5 whether the council wants to integrate the green changes in spirit, even if there might be technical words?
Correct.
That's the question. Okay.
Just from what I can see, I think the stuff that we were capturing in the beginning was more content that we needed to discuss. As I look further down, it's more nuances on assessment practices, other things that don't. But I think that our conversation today was valuable because I do want to make sure that we're able to have our teachers able to, really know culturally responsive practices. And I can see, we're in it right now in Beaverton right now with a whole adoption. And it is so emotional about where we're at with literacy. And I feel like the changes in green are affirming to the identities of our students that we have, along with it, like it's an and also saying, and we need to really have explicit practices. But it looks like as you go further down, there doesn't seem to be as much. It's more like subtle, just changes on wordsmithing. I don't know. I appreciate the conversation today to make sure we're continually, it's an and what we want for our students here. It's a both and.
Thank you. That's a really, really helpful set of points. And I think too that we're in this interesting place, right? Where we're starting to move over to implementation, which will be a whole other set of conversations, right? So how is this going to be borne out in practice? And then we start talking about how you're going to assess that, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an interesting place to be. Heidi, you still had your hand up. Are you good? Okay. Rep right.
Yes, thank you. I guess I'm feeling a little frustrated here. If we're just supposed to rubber stamp this because the ODA says this is what ODE says what they want, then I'm not sure why we're here. I mean, aren't we supposed to be discussing these and coming up with our impressions of what ODE has suggested? So I'm just a little frustration. If you just want my rubber stamp, well, I can give it to you now and I can go do other things. So I think it's important for us to discuss. I may or not agree with ODE, what they have to say, or anybody else on here, but I think I have the right to have an opinion without having to rubber stamp what they've given. This is our legacy along with our students' legacy, and we want to make sure that we've done it right. We've all involved, and given our time to be able to do this. I appreciate ODE and what they've suggested. I appreciate the co-chairs and all the work you've done and the subcommittees. But if we're here to discuss things, then we ought to have the right to discuss them.
It's a really helpful point. And my question or suggestion was not to see if there was not to foreclose the conversation, but rather to see if there was anything that was really out there that we need to identify. But we can continue to go through the document if that's what the council wants to do. And for what it's worth, I don't think there's anything in this document that ODE added that isn't represented in the framework. I think it's drawing maybe more salient or clear attention to some of those things that maybe when we as groups and subcommittee had in different places, perhaps. Katie.
Yeah, I think to Rep, right, thinking about what you said, and also what like Julie said, I think just for example, like 5, like the educators recognize and consider their own lived experiences. It's so critical, but I just worry that the way it's written, when I think about evidence for TSPC for a program to show they're doing it, that there would be kind of say we're including this and we really want to have kind of that document evidence. And so I think some of that wordsmithing, like Julie said, is better in a small group, because I think it's not the content, it's the way that it's stated right now makes it difficult for prep programs to really know what to do and to ensure that it actually is there in a meaningful way that we could provide evidence. That's my take on it. And so I think kind of the more work that I would say, yes, I appreciate Susan's thing to say, let's look at it holistically, all of these, where are we at? But it's kind of, the details are so important. And I think that work is tricky, but if we can say, yes, this content, yes, we want to see this added. I am definitely in favor of that.
Melissa.
Thank you. The reason that I would like to do the FISTA 5 is to better understand if it's more than just a subcommittee needing to look at it. If there's just simply, there are folks who would not want this language at all in there, then I think that's important for us to know before we send a subcommittee to build it in, and then we take another vote later and the same people are concerned about the content. And so that was the thought that I had.
Julie.
I guess I just have a question, and maybe some further clarification is needed for me around the additional pieces that have been added regarding language and other languages and all of that, because I thought that when we had a conversation earlier, that we agreed that those multicultural pieces were mentioned in another document, and that the focus of this document was going to be on literacy and literacy instruction for all students, and the multicultural piece was mentioned in another document. Does anybody remember that conversation? And so I guess I thought that we had that conversation about honoring, multiculturalism and other languages and all of those things, but that they were gonna, I don't know. I thought that we discussed that before.
Ken?
Yeah, I could just provide Odie's rationale for how we approach that. We did look at those other documents that are referred to, and our assessment was as strong as important as those documents are, that they were not specific enough to literacy and some of the elements that are named in the literacy framework. And that's why we recommended some of what you see in the document here today that go, I don't want to say above and beyond, but complement what is named in those other documents. So we took into consideration the council's conversation with that regard. Julie, you're remembering correctly.
Julie.
Which one? Me? Which Julie? Okay. Yes, so I think that we did talk about the ESOL standards, and then there's some on dual language, but I think it's hugely important that some of the big concepts around culture and language also be embedded and infused throughout these standards. Because we are talking about, as Dr. Williams posted in the chat, I mean, culturally responsive practices, have to kind of be central to everything we're doing. Sorry, my phone. Thanks.
The only big idea concern on the whole, that I hope the subcommittee will discuss, and maybe we need to discuss, is that some of the standards are worded in a way that it seems like our teacher candidates may have to know and be able to teach 2 languages. And I think we have to be really careful about that, just because we're dealing with many languages. And so we can't expect our initial preparation candidates to have to navigate more than one language in their initial teacher prep. So I just want to make sure that tweaking of language doesn't set EPPs up to have to do something they can't possibly do.
Totally.
Yeah. Julie.
Yeah, and Rhonda, I think I think that's kind of where I'm freaking out a little bit as a teacher working, in a school. I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, there's so much that's already on a teacher's plate. And we've talked about like how ineffective literacy instruction's been over, recent years. And so then I start thinking about all of these other things that we're talking about, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know, I don't know Spanish. I don't know another language. I, can be respectful and honor and pull things in, other resources and things, but I could not instruct a kid, using their language and English as well. I don't have that knowledge. I don't have that background base. And to put that on new teachers, it just feels like really big.
I think the other plug I'm going to make for the changes recommended in green is that they also speak to the EPP feedback we received. Right? Like there was some critique of the initial draft that, we were separating, right? Multilingual learners, we were separating special needs learners, and that having that integrated, I think not only speaks to the framework, which does do, I think, a pretty good job of integrating it, but also, you know, is reflective of that feedback.
I think just Julie and Susan, what you said, just thinking about the difference. So I think the ones that we're looking at right now are a little bit different from Julie. The one that you made me think of, if we go under fluency to the E general, like double I that was added, it notes that, sorry, let me find that space in the document. But it says, I just had it written in my notes, so let me find it in here. But it says something specifically about knowing the other languages. So general for literacy foundational skills, it says develop oral language, phonological awareness, and vocabulary across each language when working with multilingual learners. And I think that I'm curious more about that, just because if we think about, like, in Portland Public Schools, there are classrooms that can have 11 different home languages. And I think that is that to me feels a little bit different than the ones that we were talking about up here. Before we had talked about resources for teachers to go to about the specific language, so we didn't have that expectation about different ones. So I don't know, Julie, like Dr. Wren, if you want to talk more about that, but I feel like there's a difference between those two.
Yeah, I was going to, in that one with the resources is under phonological awareness, 2, can obtain resources on phonemes of other languages to inform instruction and support English learners. So it wasn't about everybody needing to be fluent or have knowledge of all of the languages that kids bring, but there are resources available where you can understand what the common phonemes are. So every teacher can be aware of those resources that they can then apply to their instruction. So so the expectations are certainly not that everybody be multilingual, but that we will prepare teachers in knowing where to find resources.
Yeah, so we had that one initially, but there's just been one added in green that's just what I like, and it's later on, so I don't know if we're talking about that, but I'm just saying the different feel of it, that I feel like there's that one that was added in green connects to the one that was there previously in a different space. And I'm just wondering about why that second one was added, what we felt was missing, and just to get clarification around that.
So Ken, is that something you can speak to? I think that Katie's referring to the top of page 11 right now. This is the whole section that was added generally for literacy foundation skills.
Yes, and my apologies for my computer decided to shut down mid-explanation, so sorry for tracking back on here. So in both areas, so you can see generally for literacy foundational skills, and later there's also kind of this added section of generally for this section. This overlapped with a lot of public comment, I should say. These were done independently, but we didn't add twice if there was recommendation for ODE, and then also some things added from public comment. Speaking to how each of these pertain to supporting multilingual learners and students with disabilities. So that was some of the rationale for adding that section. Katie, I believe top of page 11, E2 is what you're also referring to, develop oral language, phonological awareness, and vocabulary across each language when working with multilingual learners. Yeah, again, that was to apply to both all sections above, and instead of including essentially apply to supporting multilingual learners across each section, stylistically or organizationally, we included it here. Not to say that's how it has to be, but it's reflective of that area of potential stronger alignment. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm just wondering about that one in relation to the one at the top of page 10 too. It seems that those that can obtain resources on phonemes of other languages. To me, they seem to be very similar ideas written in different ways and with a different expectations of for programs. And so maybe, and I don't know, I just am wanting to kind of know more because they feel similar to me. And So I'm just curious, because to me, it seems like the way they're written, it'd be two different pieces of evidence.
Well, and that was actually the wording I was concerned about for the same reason you said, Katie, that it feels like you're asking candidates to be able to develop oral language, phonological awareness, and vocabulary across each language, and they may not be able to do that. And there's one other place where that is also under standard 5, A, multilingual learners, and number 7 under that one. Nope, that's not it. Sorry. Oh, I lost it. Yeah, and that's all I would want. I feel like, okay, and I could be out on a limb here too. I do think that in general, we are in agreement that these additions are things that need to be there. In general, we think they might need some wordsmithing to get them to a place where they are synergistic with the other standards, I guess. I guess what we need to decide is what's the process for getting us there. Julie, what's your thoughts?
Well, I was thinking specifically of the one that Katie brought up, develop oral language. So that's really specific to those teaching in dual language classrooms, right? That have the ability to do that. And then it also is confusing to me because we're talking about phonological awareness and vocabulary, only 2 of the reading pillars. So it seems A, that it's specific to a group of teachers, and B, that it's not even complete in the skills that need to be taught across the languages. I don't know. So I find it confusing. I do really like number 1 there, responsive teaching of language and literacy, because I think that has to be coupled and really emphasized, because we know how important language is to learning literacy. So those are my thoughts on those.
So let's talk about where we are and maybe what next steps are here, because obviously we have a lot of thoughts, which are good. And to Rep. Wright's comment, we don't want people to feel like they're just rubber stamping. That's not the purpose of this council, and that's certainly not the purpose of these meetings. At the same time, I'm not sure, to earlier comments, wordsmithing in the big group is probably the most efficient or effective use of the council's time. So
I just go back and say, I don't think that was wordsmithing. To me, these were big ideas. So
okay,
I'm concerned that we aren't having the discussion about them. So
sure.
That's
Yes. So I guess I'm asking, what is the next best way to make sure we can have discussion about these things and get as much input as possible? So is it that we want to maybe go into small groups and have those groups collate? Do we want to keep going in this way? What's the general sentiment? Right.
I'm for small groups.
Small groups. Senator Dembro.
I mean, what I'm hearing is general agreement that these are concepts that should be included. The question is, what will be most useful for the practitioners, both on the individual, teacher candidate, and EPP level. And that can be done in small group or a side group, it seems to me. I mean, I think what we're doing here today is agreeing that these concepts need to be included in some form, and then we have a group of volunteers that agreed to take a look at this and perhaps come up with the most effective way of wording them.
So maybe a hybrid of those 2 ideas where we go into small groups. The small groups can discuss the important points for their group, bring that back as recommendations to this subcommittee as they begin that work of integrating. Rep. Boomer, did you have Dr. Williams?
I think you just captured what I was gonna recommend. Is it sounded like people still wanted to scan the rest of the green ones to determine if they were just tweaks or if it's something the subcommittee needs to take away. And it sounds like we'll decide that in the small groups. Is that what you're suggesting?
That's kind of what I was thinking.
I think that makes sense. And I don't know if there's a way, I made a couple comments in the document, if maybe in small groups, people could flag those things, like this needs subcommittee attention. And then we can obviously also come back after small groups and do that too.
And I would just encourage you, if you want to be on the subcommittee, please volunteer to be on the subcommittee. And if you are opposed to the subcommittee, talk about that in your group and say that to the whole group when we come back. So if anybody is opposed to the subcommittee idea, say that. And then we'll do a vote again on the next steps for the subcommittee, as well as who's on the subcommittee. Nobody is here to rubber stamp.
So generally, are we ready to move into some small groups and make sure we are going through the rest of this document? So just to review, this is document 3. And we are flagging in those small groups anything that we think the subcommittee needs to work through. Okay, how long do we think we need? Half hour? Yeah.
Okay. Is that reasonable? Okay.
3:15, we'll come back.
Okay. Sounds good. Should we do a quick break prior to that? When was our break set up?
5 minutes.
So
Yeah.
maybe we'll come back at 20 after 3. So get you 5 minutes in. All right. So I see lots of comments in the document. Are there particular things that groups wanted to flag for the larger conversation here? We want to go through the document and see what other groups have remarked or anything that wasn't captured in the document.
Did everyone get a chance to comment in the document where they wanted to have consideration? Yeah.
So anything that maybe was not captured here that we want to discuss as a larger group. Okay. Wish I saw you.
Yeah,
Go.
can I offer, I got a sense that not every group had a chance to finish making comments. And so I'm curious if it would be helpful if we just kind of monitor the document and you can continue to make comments for the next few days. Would that be helpful? Can we get a yes or no on that front? I gotta see some thumbs up and head nods. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Our group didn't get through the whole document.
But I think it's helpful to be in the group setting to discuss it. Is there more
Yeah.
time to work in breakout rooms?
Yeah. Where are we at on time?
Yeah, we've got about less than 40 minutes left of our council meeting. And so maybe it's just a good time to just check in about what we still need to do and what our general timeline is, because we were optimistically hoping that we could get through 3 tasks today, or at least start discussing them, and we're on 1, and that's okay because obviously it needed more time, and that's That's what these council meetings are for, is for conversation. So at the same time, there are still things in tasks 2 and 3, if you go to that document that folks put together for us, where we're going to get, I think, into some more nuanced territory where we want to have more conversation. So just want to make sure we have time to do everything we need to do.
So one option is to table this discussion, give you all a chance to deep dive into the document on your own time for the remaining part of this week, and then spend our Monday meeting next Monday. We have an optional work group time anyway that has been set aside, so we could devote more time in that hour and a half for you to do any of the discussion that you want to do in that meeting. That's one option. Another option is that we just keep going on this discussion and have the licensure meeting on Monday. So which is your preference?
I feel like our group was having some good discussions and just didn't have time to continue processing. So I would rather wait and have the licensure discussion next week, but that's just my thoughts.
See some head nods there.
Okay, well then Melissa and Elizabeth will you be okay with that in Monday? Okay, if we shift course. So we'll do licensure discussion on Monday and we'll just keep going. So do you want to just go back into your breakouts and just continue to the discussion? Anything that you want further discussion on, or if you have specific changes, just, go ahead and put the comment on there. And then we'll reconvene about 5 minutes till 4. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go back to breakouts then. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. All right, so we need to figure out next steps. I'm looking at Pooja, like, how does this work now? Are we feeling like we're at a place where we can turn over comments to that subcommittee, who can then start some of that work, or what are folks thinking?
We didn't get through them all. We still
Didn't?
Oh.
Okay. So maybe it's another hybrid situation, like Pooja said, leaving it open for a couple of days so folks could continue to comment.
Our group did look at task 2, and so I think there would be enough there that we commented on for the subcommittee for task 2. And then
we didn't even look
Yeah.
at task 2.
So we just went, but I mean, I think if this, I don't know if subcommittees are gonna do task 2, but task 3 seems like a lot more like a lot bigger conversations that we might need, not for a subcommittee.
Right, I'm just talking about task 1 and
Okay.
the committee taking those comments.
Okay.
Was I off base on that? No.
So it seems like, do we still want the subcommittee to kind of come together? We'll do like the rest of the week with that document open for comments for you. We'll send out the link to make sure everybody has this in their email to comment on. And then do we still want the subcommittee to kind of convene to work on this?
Well,
Yes.
speaking from our group, I think there were things that we thought, we made some suggestions like of integration into the standards that I think that subcommittee could lend some expertise to.
Okay. How about the other groups? Co-Chair Gardner, your group?
I was in Jennifer's group too, and we
Okay.
were yeah, we were done with the first breakout.
Okay. Representatives from the other breakouts, Melissa?
Yes, need more time is needed. I think subcommittee would be great. I think our team would, I see my other teammates nodding their heads. I would also offer that the timeline for TSPC regarding consideration of the rules is such that we need to know the council's timeline and if the timeline for delivery has shifted at all. And I think we had planned for March 22nd to be the delivery date. And I don't think that's realistic given where we are. And so, but an estimated timeline so we can let our Rules Advisory Council know if there may be a change in their timeline and let the commission know as well. It will be important.
Yeah, great. We will need that adjustment. Okay, so it sounds like there's a subcommittee. Co-chairs, how do you want to determine who's on the subcommittee? There was just 3 volunteers, but there was nobody. I think that maybe there was one person who was from the first subcommittee that developed the recommendations. So do you want to take recommendations via email of volunteers rather, who wants to be on the subcommittee, or do you want to create space right now?
I think if there's anybody who didn't already volunteer, who is interested in volunteering, please do reach out, because I know that that group is going to want to get going as quickly as possible. And I know you're all raising your hands right now, so it's a busy time. We know, and we appreciate all your work. So I guess we'll reach out to the folks who have volunteered. If you haven't yet volunteered, please do reach out within the next couple days and speak your desire, and then we'll get the group going. So we'll see you all at the work meeting on Monday. Huh?